don't hear quite as often. We hear the story of the Annunciation, of Mary being told that she was the most favored by God, and that because of that she would conceive and bear a child, and shall name him Emmanuel. Her response was, "Let it be. Let it be with me, according to God's will." Now, we always picture it happening in the middle of the night, when everything is quiet and everyone is asleep. We see this light glowing from the window of Mary's bedroom as she slowly sits up in bed, wide-eyed with awe. She stares at the light, just making out the figure of an angel at the center. And then the dignified dialogue, beginning with a very courtly greeting. "Greetings, favored one. The Lord is with you." Now, maybe it didn't happen at night. Maybe she was on her way to the well to fetch water. Maybe she was in the marketplace. Maybe she was on the roof of her home, bathing in the mid-morning sunlight as she ground the next day's wheat. Maybe the angel didn't look very much like an angel. Sans wings and halo, without the divine backlighting, an angel might look like any one of us. Maybe he appeared to Mary like the angels appeared to Abraham and Jacob and Moses, as ordinary human beings, meeting us in the midst of life. And maybe she didn't really understand what was going on. Maybe she didn't really get that this was no ordinary man on the street, telling her tales of divine virgin birth. That kind of thing happened in the imperial family or among the pagan gods and demigods, not to a simple Jewish girl from Galilee. So imagine Mary in the marketplace. Perhaps she'd visited Joseph's carpentry shop this morning to say hello to her betrothed with whom she was setting up a household. After that, a stop by the olive oil vendor to get the month's supply. She's walking home through the crowd when suddenly there's a man keeping pace with her. She looks up at him, and he smiles down at her. Maybe he even looked like somebody she'd known all her life. In any case, this angel of God says, "Greetings, favored one. The Lord is with you." She may have taken this talk of being favored as a reference to her upcoming marriage. She may have responded with a boker tov, a good morning, and kept on walking. But he keeps talking because he has more to say. And they are very interesting things. I don't imagine Mary being wide-eyed with wonder here. I imagine her cocking an eyebrow in skepticism. She's probably had a lot of good-natured teasing since her betrothal. This is probably just more of the same. But I guess in my mind it's almost a Shakespearean scene. The heroine is too savvy to be taken in by the teasing of a puckish messenger. "I'm going to conceive, huh?" Probably. That happens to married couples. Maybe she was even teasing him back a little. "How can this be, since I am a virgin?" Pretending not to know what happens on the wedding night, maybe. But then the messenger tells her more. The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and God will quicken your womb. Even if you are a virgin, God has a habit of making infertile women give birth, like your ancestors, Sarah and Rachel. Need a more contemporary example? How about Mary's cousin Elizabeth? She's perimenopausal, and she's pregnant. Tell me God didn't have a hand in that. But yeah, if all that's so, then let it be with me, just as you said. And then they part ways. The thing is, you'd think God was too big to take such interest in a young Jewish girl, destined for an ordinary life of marriage and family, running a household. And for the most part, that is exactly the life she had led. She would get pregnant, And even if it was before the actual marriage ceremony, the neighbors would probably just assume that Joseph had anticipated the blessing of their union and consummated his marriage a little early, as happened often in those days. It isn't the norm, certainly, but it did happen. And they just pretend they didn't notice the glow of pregnancy about her until it was proper to do so. Now, Mary was an ordinary girl who lived an ordinary life. Even into womanhood, she was still pretty ordinary. And yet, God had regarded her. That big, giant God who dwells in the temple way off in Jerusalem, that big, giant God who created the heavens and the earth, the God to whom people were mere ants, that God regarded her. Because by this time in history, people had forgotten that that God was also the God who had walked in the garden with Adam and Eve, who was also the God who walked with Abraham and spoke with him like old friends, who was also the God who passed by Moses on the mountain, who was also the God who picked up Ezekiel and showed him wondrous things. That God who was so personable and who had relationships with human beings and who showed favor to those who were just ordinary Joes, you and me, always the most unlikely subjects. Gabriel came to Mary at a time when God felt distant, a deity that was up there rather than down here. A time when God had given up fighting our battles and just sat back and let us enjoy the consequences of our own actions, for good or bad. But the God of whom Gabriel speaks is not just a cosmic God, or even a global God, or even a national God. He is a personal God, who brings his presence into the lives of ordinary human beings on such a small scale that you almost have to know what you're looking for in order to see it. You have to look into the ordinariness of life and look for those blessings, for those wondrous, miraculous moments when the divine shows through, belying that myth that God is purely transcendent and showing us the immanence of God. Mary, the maiden on the verge of womanhood, ready to begin her life as wife and mother with her own household to care for, God regarded her. You are Mary, the young maiden, the virgin. Alone, you are incapable of bearing fruit, incapable of procreating because you are a virgin. But with God, you are fruitful. You are creative and procreative because God has dispelled the innocence that you were incapable and shown you that with God all things are possible. With you, you who are ordinary are potent and eminently capable. You are the virgin who no longer believes that you cannot bear Christ. With Mary, you are Theotokos, God-bearers. You are the place where God meets the world, where God enters the world, and where God enacts redemption. You, the 30-something divorcee, the 85-year-old maid, the 78-year-old widower, the pillar of the community, the relative newcomer, the student, the graduate, the teacher, the survivor, the nurse, the retiree. God has regarded you. You will conceive and bear Christ. By the power of the Holy Spirit, overshadowed by the power of the Most High, you bring forth what is holy. Like Mary, we are challenged by this Annunciation to move from who we think we are to who God has called us to be. We are ordinary, but not to God. To God, we are far from ordinary. We are God's children, God's partners in bringing Christ into this world. We are those whom God regards and favors, choosing us, virgins or perimenopausal, or as impossible as it may seem. We are chosen to bear Christ. It doesn't mean we have to leave our ordinary lives behind. It simply means that we are to recognize the exemplary, the extraordinary in our ordinary lives. Mary marries Joseph and has children. Still runs her household like any other ordinary Jewish wife and mother. Her life continues to be ordinary, just as it always promised to be. But in the midst of her ordinary life, the Christ child grew and matured. She was asked to be what she would have been anyway, a mother. There's nothing extraordinary about that. She was simply to be a mother, to raise Christ as her child, and to be called Ima, Mama, by God's own child. God calls you to be Ima. Male or female, it makes no difference. God calls you to be Ima. God comes to you in the midst of your ordinary life and shows you that your ordinariness is extraordinary because God favors you and God asks you in every day to bear the Christ. How are you, Ima? Where has wonderful things for you, ordinary though it may be? Where is our extraordinary God at work in your ordinary life? In what concrete way do you bear Christ? How do you allow God to work within and through you? Because you are Mother Mary, contributing your ordinary life to the redemptive work of God. So what do you say? Let it be with me according to your word. In our times of trouble, Mother Mary calls